Did you know that by the end of World War II, a staggering 91% of Japanese aircraft carrier crew members had been killed? This wasn't just due to the ferocity of the fighting. It was the result of a series of catastrophic decisions and design flaws that turned Japan's powerful carrier fleet into a fleet of death traps. Today, we'll be diving deep into the story of how one of the most formidable naval forces in history engineered its own destruction. At the start of the Pacific War, Japan's carrier pilots were the best in the world. Men who had trained for years, veterans of the war in China, they executed the attack on Pearl Harbor with deadly precision. But Japan made a fatal mistake with this elite group. Unlike the US Navy, which rotated its experienced pilots back home to train the next generation, Japan kept its aces on the front lines, fighting until they were killed. This meant every loss was the loss of an irreplaceable veteran. There was no one with real combat experience to pass on their skills. As the war dragged on, the quality of new Japanese pilots plummeted. Trainees who once had hundreds of flight hours were now being sent into battle with as few as 30. They were simply no match for the well-trained American aviators they faced. But the problems went far deeper than just pilot training. The very design of Japanese aircraft carriers was a recipe for disaster. They were built for speed and offensive power, with little thought given to survivability. Damage control, the art of saving a wounded ship, was almost an afterthought. Crews lacked proper training and equipment for fighting fires and controlling floods. In contrast, American carriers were designed to absorb incredible punishment and keep fighting. Their crews drilled relentlessly in damage control, and it showed. The USS Franklin, for example, was hit by 2 bombs that caused massive explosions and fires, yet her crew saved the ship. A similar hit on a Japanese carrier would have been a death sentence. The most terrifying flaw was in how they handled their aircraft. Japanese doctrine called for stowing, fueling, and arming planes in enclosed, unventilated hangar decks. This turned their carriers into floating powder kegs. When a single American bomb penetrated the flight deck and exploded in the hangar, it would set off a devastating chain reaction. Fully fueled and armed planes would explode one after another, creating an inferno that would rip through the ship. The enclosed hangars became crematories, trapping and killing hundreds of sailors. American carriers, on the other hand, had open hangars and superior ventilation, allowing explosive force to vent outwards instead of being contained. They also brought planes to the flight deck for fueling and arming, minimizing the risk of a hangar explosion. Another critical technological gap was in anti-aircraft defense. Until late 1944, Japanese warships lacked radar-guided anti-aircraft guns. Their gunners relied on visual aiming, a method that was hopelessly inaccurate against fast-moving aircraft. The probability of a Japanese anti-aircraft shell hitting its target was incredibly low. Meanwhile, the US Navy was deploying the revolutionary V. This was a tiny radar in the nose of an anti-aircraft shell that would detonate it when it got close to an enemy plane. It dramatically increased the effectiveness of anti-aircraft fire, creating a deadly wall of steel that Japanese planes struggled to penetrate. One Japanese pilot captured during the Battle of the Philippine Sea described American anti-aircraft fire as a horrifying, impenetrable wall of curtains of fire and steel. Then there was the sheer, overwhelming might of American industry. In 1941, the industrial output of the United States was more than 10 times that of Japan. This disparity was a decisive factor in the war. While Japan struggled to replace its losses, the US was building ships and planes at a staggering rate. For every 1 aircraft carrier Japan built during the war, the United States built 7. The same was true for aircraft. This industrial gap meant that Japan was fighting a war of attrition it could never win. Every carrier, every plane, every pilot they lost was a blow from which they couldn't recover. The turning point came at the Battle of Midway in June 1942. In the space of just a few minutes, American dive bombers caught the Japanese carriers at their most vulnerable moment with their hangars full of armed and fueled planes. They lost 4 of their best carriers and, crucially, the core of their veteran pilot force. The losses were irreplaceable. A Japanese naval officer later admitted that after Midway, they knew they could never replace their pilots. Every major operation from that point on was seen as a potential suicide mission. This grim reality played out in the Battle of the Philippine Sea in 1944, a battle the Americans nicknamed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The now inexperienced Japanese pilots, flying inferior aircraft, were pitted against highly trained American aviators in superior F-6F helicopters, all while flying towards a fleet protected by radar and VT fuses. The results were catastrophic for Japan. They've lost 3 more carriers and over 600 aircraft, nearly their entire carrier air power. The killer ratio was outrageously lopsided. For every American plane lost, the Japanese lost more than 10. The commander of the Japanese forces, Admiral Ozawa, could only listen in horror as his radio operators reported his pilots being shot down one after another. By the end of the war, the once mighty Japanese carrier fleet was a ghost. Its remaining carriers were either sunk or lying damaged in port with no planes to fly and no pilots to fly them. In a final, desperate act, Japan started converting merchant ships, and even old battleships, into makeshift carriers, not for conventional operations, but for one-way kamikaze missions. These suicide attacks were the tragic final chapter in the story of Japan's naval aviation. So, from the world's most feared naval arm to complete annihilation in just 4 years, the self-destruction of the Japanese carrier fleet was a result of a perfect storm. A refusal to preserve their most valuable asset there, pilots combined with fatally flawed ship designs, technological inferiority, and the overwhelming industrial power of their enemy. It is a powerful lesson from history about how strategic blunders and a failure to adapt can lead to total disaster, even for the most powerful forces. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this piece of history fascinating, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. Let us know in the comments what other historical topics you'd like us to cover. See you in the next one.